My name is Kevin Pierce. I'm the principal of Park Middle School in Kennewick, Washington.
Lori Butler, elementary school, Ridgeview Elementary School.
I'm Diana Burns, and I'm the principal at Horse Seven Hills Middle School in Kennewick.
Yeah, my name's Alyssa St. Hilaire, and I'm principal at Highlands Middle School.
Well, I think what it is, the budget, there's people here in Kennewick that show you how to do everything for the most part. So the support is there to sit down and you actually work your budget out for the year. Everything is computerized as far as monitoring your spending. Your budget codes is pretty clear. Everything is really easy to stay on top of as far as what your spending is. What I found difficult is being able to manage the whole building, the needs and kind of the wants, and be able to project how you're going to do everything that you want to do with the money that you have. I mean, essentially that's what budgeting is, but a lot of times when you're just new, you don't have a reference point for that. So it's difficult because you start seeing that you want to do these things. You want to buy this furniture for this place, but you're not quite sure how that's going to impact everything else within your budget. So as you get more experience, of course you get better at that.
Well, for me, just in the last couple years as principal, because the other assistant had handled the budget prior, is just learning all of the different little numbers that go at the end of the budget, what can be used to pay classified, certified, is it for teaching and learning, is it for buying supplies? Because if you attach the wrong number, then you get a little note back from somebody saying, this is not correct, please fix it. So that really was the biggest learning curve.
There's a lot of buildings in our district that have a carryover, a huge carryover. And so I realized that I went through my budget and my carryover last year with doing projects. And, from funding the play that was not part of the budget, but a teacher had this great idea, wanted to do a play. And so we thought maybe we could get some donations from the community that didn't work out. So I ended up carrying that through our building budget, and it ended up costing like $2,000,
So we look at the physical plant. We've always had a budget that we keep for that, and then we look at instruction and how it goes with our school improvement plan. What is it we want to do? We've been working on our tiered classes in reading and math, knowing that at the end of 3 years we'd look at them, evaluate how effective they are, and we've known for a year or two that we wanted to do something other than corrective reading. And probably the best thing out there right now is Read 180. So for a couple of years we've been pigeonholing some money, carrying it over to, with the idea that we would purchase that program. And we did go in and look at that this year and visited some schools using it. To my shock, great shock, it was 3 times the cost we had budgeted for in our building. Right. So, at that time I just wrote a grant for federal programs, and they're through federal programs and SPED, they help pick up the rest of the tab on that, so we could, I've learned you always ask if somebody else can help.
Well, I think the stress of making sure you're spending money correctly and that it's guided and spent on students, you always want to make the right decisions with that as far as money. I get stressed out because the software program that manages the money always seems to be about 30 days behind, and things have to be bought. So looking at 2 spreadsheets saying, no, I know that money's been spent, or why is there so much in there? I feel like it's always a haze, honestly. And then using I don't work, my brain doesn't work in numbers. So having all the budget codes isn't a natural fit for my brain. And I know that I've spent out of one budget code, and then when I look on my spreadsheets, it wasn't taken out of that budget code, and getting those fixed is a frustration.
I guess would be having the ability to spend money where I want to spend it. Because the codes that we're constrained by are developed at the state level, and so we can only spend money out of certain
The other thing too, it's been a little bit different. unique, I suppose, for me is when I came in my first year, the district actually started increasing our budget. And at first it was kind of like, well, we have some extra money, and so we're going to give you this one-time bonus. And it was like $10,000. My building budget's right around $100,000 that I control. So it was about a 10% increase. And that created an opportunity for me to really say yes, maybe more than I should have, but I had the money there. That money continued into the next year, and I have not raised the individual budgets of teams and departments, so I've had more money that I've been able to control. And then we, when I first came, we didn't have admin match money, okay? So it's administration match through DSHS, and we didn't control any of that. It was sent directly to the district to help fund our security officer. Well, over 2 years, I was able to get them to relinquish control of that. So that this last year, we've been steadily increasing that. And this last year, we got $28,000 on top of the extra 10 and my building budget. So that's an increase of, what, 40% or so, a lot. But I still spent it. Well, it kind of depends on what level you're talking about. You know, as far as the daily operations of our office, we have a secretary that does nothing but take fees from kids, whether they be fines or ASB charges, whatever. So she always has cash, and she's making deposits on a daily basis where somebody comes and takes those
I
deposits.
think it's helped for, well, it does help to have a central department, you know, downtown, the administration that kind of oversees it to make sure that we're spending it appropriately. When I did my principal credentials, that was the one thing that my professor said is you can get fired over two things: misappropriating your funds and being unethical, you know, which sometimes goes hand in hand with that.
That's true.
So it's pretty difficult to, I think, spend money unethically with the way that it's set up. But we could be careless, and so I think having someone overseeing it at downtown.
Well, you really want to make sure, like, your ASB secretary knows the rules, and this is our second ASB secretary, and they are both just very tenacious about following the rules, and you need to be. So when it comes to receiving money, it always has to be done that day. We have 2 people. That's a safeguard to check. And then if it's not taken to the bank that day, it's locked up in the vault. And I would say what I learned this year, because we had a change in our PTO officers, they really didn't have protocols set up for handling the money, and I wasn't sure how much which was going to be involved in that, or how much accountability if something went wrong, I guess that's what I was really thinking. But I had to work with the PTO for them to set up some procedures like that, because they were having some just problems between themselves about the money getting to the right place in a timely manner. So you want to be aware of that too. Check on what your PTO is
So
doing.
we have fabulous secretaries, and they got double count a lot of things. When we have fundraisers and kids are counting, we always have a triple check system. So the kid counts it in front of someone, and then our secretary or another staff member counts it as well, and then there's a big reconciliation from there as well. And then we have locks and safes in the office that are used.
As far as accounts and spending to meet the needs of the building, that's all being basically supervised and overseen by the business office, and ultimately the business manager, which is Vic Roberts, his fiscal officer, which is Marty Rose, and then they've got a whole series of secretaries that watch us very closely. So as far as safeguards go, the biggest thing that's happened is a thing called a P card, and that was introduced, I think, 3 years ago, and that was a huge shift for us, because prior to that, you always used purchase orders. Now all of a sudden we have a credit card, so we can use that credit card to go purchase things, and we have gotten ourselves into a little trouble here and there as they've looked at some of the purchases. And for instance, we were getting ready for a parent night, and they went to go purchase some things for this fun event we were doing. And I said, you know, get some, we were buying some food and there was some incentive items to get people to go. And that becomes a gift of public funds, which is real problematic. In addition to that, one of the persons that was doing it bought a gift card with the P card. And I got an email back right away that said, you cannot buy gift cards with the P card. It's a huge red flag. And so I got this real formal email that was kind of protecting the business office, because auditors look at those P cards very closely. So P card is something that I've gotten calls on the last 3 months about things that my secretaries need to do a better job of, to making sure everything has to match.
But for me personally, I have a set budget that has been very consistent. This is my 18th year as a building administrator, and I change it very little from year to year. So in the last 18 years, at the elementary level, what we need to spend money on every year is pretty consistent. So once that budget is set, I just follow it, and it works well.
I think just the number of budgets that you're dealing with, there's quite a list of them, and at first it was a little difficult to know which account was really supposed to be funneled where, and how to manage, how to even sit down and really project your budget as you take a look at it. Those are kind of challenging. I mean, somebody has to sit down and with you and go over that, but then it's just knowing over that first year to 2 years which code is really the best one to use. There's a lot of them that you're dealing with,
Yeah.
and each code, each part of the budget code represents a certain specific purpose that it's supposed to be used for. Once you get that, once you're comfortable with that, it takes a little time, things get easier. Then it becomes, like I mentioned before, then it's just a matter of prioritizing your needs so that you don't overspend, or you don't get in the habit of saying no to everybody too. Because that money's meant to meet the needs of the school. That's what it's meant to.
Like I said, it was all those little numbers. Really, truthfully, I understood like that we just go out every year, we look at this is how much money we have, so how much are we going to set aside for curriculum, what is in our plan, school improvement plan, what are we looking ahead to as far as the physical plan needing to be done. So we've always had a budget, a pretty good budget, but it's just that, putting those codes on, and we created a cheat sheet, which is very helpful. So what I would suggest is if your secretary doesn't really understand those, that you sit down with Marty, who's awesome, and the secretary, and just, for me, that's been a benefit, is sitting down with the secretary, making sure she understands, because some things were getting coded incorrectly and taking out of the wrong pots of money. And there are pots that can carry over at the end of the year and pots that cannot. So you always want to spend out of the ones that can't carry over first.
Well, I like to have a budget and know that it comes out of each area and follow those guidelines, and expenses always come up that you don't budget for. So microscopes have to be serviced, or sewing machines have to be serviced, and those don't get built in to, they weren't built in. And so it's like, because I want to follow a budget. So I'm a spontaneous person. I like to be flexible, but when certain expenses come up and you haven't budgeted it, we have a rainy day fund, but I feel like we go into it way too often. The laminator broke, so we had to do that. Printers break, or that kind of stuff. Or a teacher moves classroom and takes the phone, printer, and everything with them, and you can't find it, so then you have to buy a new one for that new teacher coming in.
Gotcha.
Well, I felt I was pretty prepared for how to manage a budget, but when we have some flexibility to allow teachers funds to spend. So principals can set it up where each teacher has a certain amount of money, or a department or a grade level has a certain amount of money, but yet we spend out of these codes, and so teachers don't have specific codes necessarily, or if we do, we're adding more to the complex nature of a school budget. So I guess the biggest challenge for me was to set an internal accounting system up for myself, so that I gave teachers and grade levels certain amounts of money each year to be able to spend as they needed for their personal, needs in their classroom. But then I needed to account for it kind of outside of the regular structure of a school budget.
Okay. So in my role as principal, I oversee the building budget. I have a lap budget because we're a lap building this year, but I don't know how much is in that one. I write a proposal to our federal projects director and he either approves it or disapproves it. So I don't really have control of that one, but I'll write proposals and more often than not, they're approved. Our assistant principal oversees our ASB budget. So she takes care of overseeing how ASB is spent. I don't have control of, say, our ad match money that comes in. I get an amount each year and then we know how we can spend it, but it can fluctuate from year to year. So I don't count on having that money. It's just kind of some extra each year, like, okay, so we'll use this, this, and this for it this year. Our SDMC, that's our shared decision-making committee. They oversee our professional development money. So they talk in the fall how they want to use that. The building for the last few years has decided to use it to release teachers to do PLC work. So they spend it all on subs.
Well, I have control over, it's called your building budget, okay, basic ed funding. There's a certain amount of money per student that you're allocated. That comes to us. It's then divided up into departments and individual classroom supplies. All said and done, there's a certain amount that goes to printing, your copier lease. There's a certain amount that goes to the counseling department, for our counselors, little professional development. I think all said and done, when you get there, not including admin match, I have control over about $30,000 that is unattached to anything that allows us to, function throughout the year and buy things.
Pretty much salary, benefits is all, it's, tied to my school of whatever the cost of my staff is, but I don't control that, So what I do control is supplies and materials, professional development, both for myself and my staff, and some grant money, which is used for any donations we have from our PTO group. If they raise money and they say, here, we'd love for you to buy some computers, then I put it in my grant fund and I spend out of that. And so
we have about $600,000 that comes to us from title, federal funding. Most of that is salaries, okay, for teachers and para-eds. Lately, we've been receiving about $30,000 from title. Its purpose is to help us with staff development. So we have some freedom in how we do that, but it has to be, used to improve teachers.
So, but I have had some staff paid out of that. We used to have a bilingual program at my school. Everything was just treated with general ed dollars other than salaries of my staff that was paid out of that. So that's handled at the district level. So I'm still constrained by what teachers who are paid out of those budgets can do and who they can work with. But as far as materials and supplies, I just covered it all.
We will be a title school next year, so I'm not versed yet. We are a lap school, so there are some guidelines and restrictions. We can only spend money for LAP is a learning assistance program, and I believe it's state money. We can buy stuff for remediation, so kids below grade level. So we've used LAP funds to bring in a coach to work on our implementation of corrective math. We've used LAP funds to send teachers to trainings on direct instruction strategies. We've used LAP funds to buy workbooks for corrective math or textbooks for corrective reading or the teacher's edition.
Benefits the school by a huge degree by just increasing staff members. we are fortunate to have a class size ratio right now of right around 1 in 25, I'd say. It might be even a little less in 6th grade. We have about 10 paraeducators, and that would be, it certainly would not be near to that size if we didn't have federal. So I've seen 3 different federal program directors here in Kennewick during that time. You work closely with them, and they each interpret their job and the way that they follow the rules a little differently. So you end up really just getting to know them and knowing where and how to best communicate your needs so that those things get met.
So when I want, if we need additional funding, like we always use our admin match, and we still do that because that's one of the pots of money that we can spend pretty freely without a lot of strings attached. When we want to do training for teachers, like give them release time, it's always, I write to federal programs and requesting money. And I haven't really done much with SPED other than the Read 180. Did have a conversation about a Read and Write Gold program, but they saw we had a lot of carryover, so they said, "Oh, I think you can afford that yourself." We had to prepare for the comprehensive review audit because there's just the chance they could come this past March. And yeah, they didn't come to our school. But just compiling that notebook and getting everything into one place really was very beneficial. And now we're just keeping it up so that we know it's finance as well as all of the programs in your building, but it really does help kind of bring everything together and put it in one place.
Yeah, definitely. So very tiny involvement. I was an ASB advisor before I became principal, but when I came to this building, the building I was at Kennewick was audited, and I was involved in some fundraisers, and one of the trainings they say is keep everything because an audit might come up. And so an auditor did email me asking me about some fundraisers that I oversaw when I was at Kennewick. So it was about 2 years old, I think, and I had to write a narrative as to how money was counted for a certain fundraiser. So I did have my paperwork that I could pull out and look at, and I was comfortable answering those questions. But I knew up front the ASB spending rules that could happen.
We had a complete program review just in March, and but I think the district as a whole is audited every year. I've never had an auditor when it comes to budgeting at my school. It's all been done at the district level. But I know that the auditor does pick a school occasionally to go, and they'll look at a purchase order. For instance, maybe a projector that was purchased, and they'll see where that projector's in the inventory where it's supposed to be. Then they go to that classroom and make sure that it's there. And it's just to make sure that, things are being spent and the items are where they're supposed to be. As far as our money, our spending, like I said, it's reviewed constantly by business office. There are times when, they ask us why did we purchase this. For instance, we're doing the big boat races, and I purchased remote control boats with my building budget, okay? And last year we got the Gear Up grant to purchase it. Well, they're gone, so I had purchased that building. It was about 6 boats, so it was about $350 for remote control boats. And I got an email from business office just asking why was I purchasing remote control boats with building budget money. So I had to explain that it was part of a science engineering unit, and they're like, okay, great. Yeah.
Finance is not my strength area, but I am responsible for it. So the secretaries do a lot, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's great to have. I sit down monthly with my secretary and we look at what's been spent, where it's been spent, and we try to reconcile. But secretaries can be a really good friend to have when it comes to spending and keeping track of who's doing what.
I think that you need to spend some time understanding, going over the budget with your principal, understand what the budget codes mean, and during that internship time, as much as possible, consistently look over that budget so that you get a good enough understanding to when you receive that question when you're being interviewed, that you can talk about it and show that you understand it. You will, depending on the size of your district, have a lot of support. So that's just going into it and understanding that just because you don't know every detail doesn't mean you're going to mess up. I mean, you got people there to help you.
You know, when you get a position, meet with the finance person like our Marty Rose and have them explain to you and maybe help create that cheat sheet about this is the money and this is this can be spent only for classified staff. These are the codes. These are the codes for certificated. This is teaching and learning. This is for buying supplies. And I think if you have that, for me, that understanding would have been beneficial.
Ask questions and always, that's the big one, ask questions. But my suggestion would be if you're doing an internship or you're thinking about it, to ask your principal to be part of some committees. I know some buildings have a building budget committee, or sit through ASB funding training and see that. Meet with Marty Rose or the fiscal officer for the district so you can see all the budget codes. There's board presentations that go over the budget for the whole district. So I would just say ask questions and find out. For classroom teachers, there's just a lot more views of what goes on with that public money. And the more you can learn, the more responsible you'll be with that money to help kids learn.
I guess my advice would be to don't turn it over to someone else. I think some people might have. I have an excellent secretary who keeps track of a lot of the purchase orders and that kind of thing for me. Together we do that, but don't remove yourself from the bottom line. Always know where your money is being spent, who's spending it, and what your final budget is. I think that's one of the challenges, though, is that we don't always get the most recent, up-to-date, like, what's my bottom line? I keep my internal, so I kind of have a sense, but at the end of the year, when we have some end-of-the-year expenses, we have to get things spent. It's a little bit better now than it used to be, but you used to have everything spent by the 1st of March. And yet we had half a year or a third of a year left and so you had to foresee what you would need, get everything purchased or encumbered first by then, and then just ride out the rest of the year. That was very
As far as how to just take your money and allot it, it's not that complicated. You have your physical plant needs, you have your instructional needs, which is largely driven by your school improvement plan and what you're trying to do building wide. And so you just allot that money and think ahead, try to get carryover so when the time comes, you've got the money there to buy that piece of furniture or that program.
Nobody expects somebody that hasn't any experience to understand completely how budgets work, because you don't get to do that until you get the job. I mean, it's just how it is. So that's understandable. But if you go there and you've done your homework and you can talk somewhat articulately about that and give them assurance that you'll be able to pick this up.
But also know, allow enough freedom in your budget that if you need something, buy it. Don't be stingy.
Make sure that you dress up on days you're going to be interviewed.